I want to take a moment to introduce you all to Sean. Sean is Woodland Cree from Montreal Lake Cree Nation in northern Saskatchewan. He is currently a professor at the University of Alberta, specializing in Indigenous education, working alongside and relentlessly advocating, researching, and writing about the experiences of Indigenous youth and families, both inside and outside of educational spaces. Sean previously presented at YouthREX's first Knowledge to Action Exchange event in 2016. I'm not sure if any of you were participating in that event at that time. I know Cyril was there. This is a really wonderful full circle moment for YouthREX as we're commemorating our 10th anniversary in 2025. So we're so grateful, Sean, that you could be here with us. And I'm going to now welcome you, turn it over to you. Welcome, Sean. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me here. This is great. I wish we were all in the same room together. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. And I just, yeah, I'm thankful for to be here to, yeah, and the time, I know people always, I guess my dad used to always say, and I never used to believe him, that time does go by quickly, so yeah, here I am, today sitting at my kitchen table, gonna give you everything I got from my heart to speak about some of these pieces, some of the things I've been up to. I'm going to share some pieces that I've been writing, inspired by young people in different communities. And I'll start it off with this opening piece that I call Bubbling Up. And I'm going to read this piece. I wrote it during COVID, and I wrote it for a couple reasons. One, because my adopted mom said, "Hey, Sean, can you write something that's not boring?" And I'm like, "Thanks for the feedback, positive life coach." And she's like, "No, like you write, but I don't understand what you're talking about, in those academic journals. So can you write for fun?" So I started writing for fun, and right now I'm writing 5 kids books, and this is going to be made into a comic book for kids. But it's a story that I want you to imagine with me. And like I said, I wish I was there with you right now. It would be way more powerful, but we're going to do the best that we can. But I want you to think with images in your mind, and I want you to think about the different opportunities, in terms of like animating this story. It's a story about my daughter, but it really isn't. It's about the bubbles that are in all of us. So I'll begin with bubbling up, and then we'll move through these pieces. Bubbling up. Bubbling up like a soda pop fizzing inside of me is how I feel. This feeling's in my stomach always. You see, I want to tell the stories my dad has shared with me and the stories his mother and grandmother share with him about his home and community. He must really like these stories because he's always talking about them in some way. I want to put my hand up. I want to reach real high. I want to tell my teachers what I know. I want to tell the world how much I know about all these things he'd share with me, but I can't, even when it's bubbling up inside of me. I go silent. I stay silent always. You see, my dad, he's Woodland Cree. He tells me many stories of his home and the people in the community. I guess as his daughter, this makes me Woodland Cree also. I'm just learning, still learning, always learning. I go back home to his community with him sometimes, and let me tell you, it's a long ways from the city. We have to travel all day, no cell phones, he says here. I won't tell dad, it might disappoint him to know that drive is way too long. When we go back home to the community, we fish together, we walk down the forest trails, and he always wants to hold my hand. It's different here in the community. There are so many trees and water in this forest place. He tells me how happy he is when I come with him. I believe him when he says that. I'm not going to tell him that I don't really love fishing, but I'll still give it a try. It's usually just me and my big sister that travel back home with him. I wonder about that. I can see that he's so proud when he is with us in his community. He literally and annoyingly introduces us to everyone. First the elders, then vice chief, then the chief, and his cousins and aunties and his family. There's so many people here to meet in this place. Everyone's laughing all the time, it seems. It's exhausting here. It bubbles up inside of me, some of those stories he shares with me. Little bubbles inside me start floating from the bottom to the top of my stomach, reaching out in all kinds of directions. I think when I imagine them, they're all kinds of colors, mostly bright yellow is my favorite. There are different shapes and sizes, small to large and large to small. They have this way of gently lifting me up inside. Dad says always be proud of your Woodland Cree roots. The stories are deep inside you. Maybe the stories he speaks of are the bubbles that I'm feeling inside me, wanting me to float, wanting me to take flight in some ways. I don't quite know what it means when he says that to me. I hope someday he solves this riddle for me. But that's my dad always speaking like that. I'm used to it by now. I'm used to him by now and his ways of never ever giving me the answers I'm looking for. I want to tell my teacher. I want to tell my friends. I want to tell all the stories he shares with me, even the stories of fishing, I guess, would be okay at this point. At his home, I notice he has beautiful art, buffaloes in nature, bears, and colorful circular images all over the walls. My dad writes stories about his home and his community in his journals. He doesn't know this, but I sometimes go through those journals and read them all by myself. I read about the stories of him as a young boy, my little brother and sisters. Dad takes me to so many places to share about his culture, our woodland roots, he says. He always says, someday you'll understand more. I wish the guy would just hurry up and tell me. Bubbling up, it's like bubbles filling inside me. I get so excited to try and share some of the stories, but to tell you the truth, I don't think that people will believe me. Some might even laugh, even though I've been to all these places with my dad. You see, I have light brown skin. I have the wildest curly hair, at least that's what my dad says. He says it's my superpower. I have brown eyes like him, but they're a different sort of brown, mixed with green, so that makes it different. That makes us different. My eyes are round, his are differently shaped. He says my middle name, Sage, comes from a place of stories. It's funny because I don't even know what that means when he says that, but let me guess, someday I'll understand more. I sit at my desk and squirm, hoping that no one asks me when we talk about these ideas at school today. I hope no one notices how uncomfortable I am and that my face is starting to turn a little red, even when it's not visible to others. Bubbles rise up faster now, quicker during these times. And then when I go silent and say nothing like I do every time, I can literally feel the fizz inside of me disappearing. It's at this point that the bubbles begin to no longer float. They slowly lose their shape, become flat, and move back slowly down the pit of my stomach. I'm wondering sometimes if this is where they really belong. Maybe I should just keep them here. At this point, I could start to quietly hear his voice inside of me repeating regularly to be proud of your woodland roots. At this point, I could feel him holding my hand walking down the woodland trails of our community. At this point, I can remember the sounds of laughter in a different language as he made me meet all those people. I guess they're my people also. I'm just beginning to understand this now. I could see it, remember, when I think about the fish, the stories in those journals, and all the places he's trying to show me. Through his art, in the stories, and in the possible many meanings of my middle name, Sage, Sage. It's bubbling up once again like a soda pop fizzing inside of me. It is how I feel. I want this feeling to be in my stomach always. Tineke, thank you, Dad. Thank you. So I guess we'll click on the next slide. Yeah. So let me just take a drink of water here. And you mean this is, I wrote that piece, for a whole bunch of different reasons. I wrote it right at this very kitchen table, because I wanted to write differently. But I wrote it. It's about my daughter, but it's really about like the bubbles that are inside of all of us. Um, I love thinking about the bubbles, and I love thinking about the Nigerian storyteller Ben Okri, who says that stories are in our bones, that we're all storied people, and I really believe that. You mean that the stories are our bubbles? The bubbles have a way of gently lifting up, and what I want for young people, both in and outside of school, is to be able to keep their hand up. To be able to like float to different places in their imagination, to be able to have those bubbles intact in all kinds of spectacular colors and all kinds of spectacular shapes and sizes. And I think that through the most difficult time with young people, that's what really I'm looking for at this point in my life, to try to help animate some of those stories or some of those bubbles, to try to listen carefully for them, to look for them even when they can't quite identify them within themselves, but they're in their bones, they're in their blood memory, they're within them. But some of the places that we meet with young people, they don't quite have a chance to truly animate them in all the beautiful ways. So that's what I'm thinking about, not only at in a kid level and a young people level, but I also think that in a service provider and an educator level and a social worker and someone who does graphic arts and someone who's engaging in different ways, that we all have bubbles that are part of our story. And sometimes, in difficult times, we forget to call on them. So I'm looking at this one picture here, and that's the bubbling up kid, walking to school on the first day of kindergarten. I'm wearing horrible pants and shoes, but I'm wearing a jacket from my home community of Montreal Lake Cree Nation in post-secondary. I was the first one in my community to do a PhD, and I was so thankful for the opportunity that my community gave me to to study, to learn. I know that I had different opportunities than a lot of my family members and a lot of my community members, and I always remember that and try to make sure that I'm giving back in all kinds of ways to the community to keep this going forward, because I don't want to be the last one. I know there's going to be all kinds of people from my community that are going to engage in studies or be the best welder or be the best construction worker or be the best teacher or social worker. I know that's right around the corner. I'm thinking the commonplace, and I first showed this slide when I was in Toronto, actually downtown Toronto, speaking to a group of superintendents, and I could just feel that maybe some of maybe what I was going to talk about, they're thinking maybe, oh, it's just going to be another native narrative, another native story about reconciliation that we have to listen to. But we should really get on with it and talk about the more important things about leadership and curriculum and some of these other pieces. But I put this slide up there. I found it, this old slide that's not a very good picture, because I said the commonplace to me is when we drop our kids off at school, if we have an opportunity to drop our kids off at school, you mean that we'd want the same thing as other people? You know, just because they're in a big city in this big place called Toronto and they're all superintendents, I would want the same thing for my kids that they probably want the same thing for their kids and our little cousins or our little nephews and nieces, or in some ways our grandchildren. Is that when we drop them off to school, we want them to have an amazing experience. I'm reminded by my friend Jean Clendenen and how she asked that question about like wondering if when kids get dropped off at school, who they play with, does it seem like they're having fun? Does it seem like they have friends? Are they having a good experience? So the commonplace for me right at the very beginning in terms of working with youth is that beyond, religion or politics or gender, or culture, that we'd want the same thing for our children when we walk them to school in those beginning days, in those first moments. And that's a commonplace that stays with me. And then when I really unpack that, I'm just hoping that we have the opportunity to bring our kids to school, because in a lot of the places I've been spending time with, there really is very limited opportunity to actually walk down a straight path like this to school. So these are the things I'm thinking about. Click. And thank you to my awesome clicker who is helping me with my technology on the other end from the organization today, from YouthREX. I put that the lights turned on, and I remember writing that piece about bubbling up and just thinking about it right now in the present, is that I wanted to write something different. And I try to write every single day a little bit. And if I can't write, I talk on my phone. And I try to write pieces that I'm thinking about, things that are help me to think, things that are helping me to sustain my practice, even if it's just one sentence. That's what I try to do every single day, and read a little bit. But I thought about this piece, in the present, how COVID, and I know it seems like a past tense, that it brought us to these uncomfortable, uncharted, unknown, you know, we didn't have the tools to actually even begin to understand what was actually happening with young people. And quite, quite frankly, what was happening with ourselves. with our own stories, with our own loss, with our own sensibilities and some of the tensions, even within our own families. And I started thinking about how this still is present, that unknown creates fear, and fear is so closely connected to anger. And the reason why I'm saying that is because in the present right now, I'm still working with many communities. One community I'm working with in particular, there's 120 students that still haven't gone back to school since COVID. And so my job largely and what I do is I work 7 days a week in the in-between spaces. And I meet kids on the street, at ice rinks, at places like the Cat Cafe here in Edmonton to like keep them going a little bit, to keep the story hopeful a little bit, to listen to their story, and hopefully to like start a little bit of a fire so it can actually bring them back home to school in a small way. So I'm actually my own school. I have my own school number, and I meet kids, in all these different places, mostly over tea, and trying to think about ways to keep this going, to keep a little bit more hope going. I put this slide because I like it because it's two awesome young people from my home community in Montreal Lake, just playing. And I'm thinking about the work that we do. Not only as like I'm not only thinking this in a young person's life, but I'm thinking about you as a service provider, and how much this one simple line, stays with me in the present. We talk about life and transitions and going backwards and forwards over time, thinking about some of the stories that brought us to this work, some of the stories that keep us going in this work. And so my one friend who studied teachers and teacher educators who left the profession and who were trying to sustain themselves in the profession, he used to use the line that what sustains us, not what retains us. And I started thinking about that so differently. And I started thinking about that really in relationship to young people is to like what keeps their backpacks. Where do they hang their backpacks when they go to school? If they have a backpack. I mean, but the importance of like what keeps them going. So this is the most annoying question I ask young people all the time. I ask them, hey, like what sustains you? And they're like, Lessard, can you just please speak English? What does that actually even mean? No, like what sustains you? What keeps you going? And the key difference for me when I'm thinking about that, in a young people's life is that retention is a flat piece. There's not a life there. It seems like a square box or a rectangle when I say that word. But the word sustain has animation, it has life, it has color to me. It's a verb, it's beautiful. And we think about it, I think about it with young people all the time. It's a question I ask them when I'm in schools, which I'm in schools almost every single day, spending time with young people, thinking about like what sustains them. And for the most part, it's people like you, an adult in their life that's keeping them a little bit more hopeful, that's keeping them going, that listens to their story, even when the stories are difficult. Most times it's you. You mean the work that you do. And I think about that practice with young kids, but I think about it in the practice, in my own work, in the work that you're doing, that is so much hard work, it could be difficult work. You're hearing difficult stories, and we know that when we hear difficult stories, that we got to learn to do something with them to process them in positive ways. So I asked that question to you, during the slide about like what's sustaining you, not what retains you. And in this way, we get to like begin to imagine together and shift imagination when I'm thinking with youth, thinking about not only the backward stories, the difficult stories, but the more hopeful stories that aren't filled with deficit, that are filled with bubbles and future thoughts and future dreams. And we're part of that, navigational tool to help them imagine otherwise. I just put this old slide up because it takes me back home. And I think about like the different places, in my life. And I'm thinking about it's almost this time of year with that snow falling where we enter Montreal Lake Cree Nation, which is around probably around a 9 hour drive from where I'm living right now. And I talk about the importance of mapping the landscape, and thinking about our home stories. And also a reminder that like some of us, we don't always know what our home story is. Sometimes we're lost boys and lost girls in the forest, even though when we're living in the city. You mean it's a forest in a different way. And I think about the home places and sometimes the home places like this old barn. I think my dad was a social worker, all along. He was a farmer with a grade six education, but he had a sense of something different with me in the sense that I went from place to place early in my life from Montreal Lake Cree Nation to like foster cares in different places. And then I finally got picked up on the free agent waiver wire to like a farm family, a non-Indigenous farm family in North Battleford, Saskatchewan. That's where my last name Lessard comes from. And that's where a lot of the stories, I can remember come from, life on a farm, being like so noticeably different than my brothers and sisters. But remembering that I had these opportunities that a lot of young people didn't have. And in that barn, my youth worker, social worker father filled it with sports equipment, basketballs, a volleyball, hockey nets, and a basketball hoop. And he said, quite frankly, he just said, shoot pucks, shoot baskets, play volleyball, and don't talk to girls. That was his early advice to me on the farm. Like, I think a lot of it was pretty accurate, but he knew I needed something different. And so he gave me these opportunities to play and maybe to travel in my imagination, all kinds of different places. A barn that really doesn't look like much at all, really. But upstairs was filled with all kinds of potential and possibility for me to think different, to process, to play freely. I also had like a safe place to stay. I had food. I had all these things, and I'm reminded that like a lot of kids, a lot of young people I work with don't have home places like that. They don't have a barn on a farm where they can just shoot in a free kind of way. But at times, the home place, I'm reminded, is the story between you and them over a cup of tea. Sometimes the home place is school. Sometimes the home place is fishing together in silence. Sometimes the home place is something as simple as walking in a park in an urban place and just listening to someone else's story. Those are the best lessons I've learned along the way. And then I'm going to go backwards in time. And this is a piece I've never read in public, but I wrote, a couple of years ago. And it's called The Iceman. And maybe I wanted to bring that up when I was thinking about some different things to bring to this audience today, to these beautiful people who are thinking in similar ways. I feel like I'm with kindred spirits today, being able to speak about kids on the margins, not marginalized kids, something completely different. The Iceman was my dad, and I wrote this piece in honor of him. But it's about my father, but it's really about the embodiment and the stories that exist within all of us, especially in this type of work. So let me share this with you. Here we go. I know when I'm getting closer to this home place, I can feel it within, pulling on my memories. At the edge of town, I'm met by a beautiful valley where the North Saskatchewan River winds through the sage hills and prairie grasses, carving out a pace of perfection from north to south. I recall the physical geography with fondness as I travel the stories, early stories of my First Nation ancestors who lived in this place long ago, before farms and settlement, before busy towns, before travel in this contemporary way. I think about the physical markers when I drive down the highway to this home place. I recall many similar trips home, traveling back, thinking about the early place in memory. I could feel it within me once again today, senses awakening time, taking over as I returned home. It has been far too long. My dad was a farmer who grew up in this prairie town. He had a small farm north of the city near what the locals called the 13-mile corner. As I turn back in memory, flip back to early moments at home, this place always stays with me. At an early age, my family adopted me. I'm from a northern community called Montreal Lake Cree Nation. Images, I'm surrounded by trees, long tentacles creeping out over the ice rink in this prairie place. The moon watches over me at night, pushing back the darkness. Snow piled high early mornings. It's still dark in this place. I could spot him. He's out there in a fog of memories that stay with me much later adult moments. Misting, flooding, tending the ice. It's so cold out there this morning. Casting shadows now. I could see him moving back and forth with a sense of direction, a certain cadence in the movement. I could see him through the farm light, one bulb hastily hung from the telephone pole. I'm watching from the bay window at the kitchen table. I heard him get up early and waited until he was well along the way. I used to watch him often from that kitchen table, performing this weekly ritual. I wish I could go outside and help him, maybe play just one more game before school starts. The ice rink of my childhood was giant in my mind. He constructed with old wooden boards from the fencing no longer needed. At 6 a.m., the water show starts. Frozen particles splinter across the ice, spraying, projecting from the black hose. I could still see it. I could still feel how these early experiences travel within me, conjuring and pulling, nudging me back to outdoor places of my childhood. He promised he would build it, and he did every winter, year after year after year. No bumps on that ice, smooth, carefully crafted, weathered makeshift boards, humble boards, keep the puck in place, soft touch or ricochet, watching the puck skip across the frozen surface, blades glide, dancing this way. My dad was the iceman and my goalie. He did not know how to skate. We played in that sheet of ice nearly every night during the long lull of winter in that prairie place. I can still see it when I close my eyes, those big black boots with yellow tattered laces. This image I recall looking down as he held me up going forward. I was only 4 when I first started. He was moving me around the ice, balance, careful, step by step through the silence. Gray park, no toque, full fur, coldness weathered. Those are the early moments of memories of place in childhood that stay with me. It's seasons changing time now with the first snowfall. Running down the lane after school to get to our skating rink. I recall, let's go. Hurry up, it's getting dark. We got to play, Dad. I'm thinking it must have been difficult some days for him to follow me, effort needed, slowly bundling up. I could tie my own skates now. I'm getting stronger now. I don't need as much help now. I'll be all right now. Faster, smoother, gliding edges over time. I'm the only one out there most nights now. My dad was tired. He could no longer stay out like he used to. I only began to understand this much later. These early memories stay with me in the present and are called forth through the sprinkle of snow, ice forming, sliding forward through the sounds of children laughing in an outdoor rink of their own. I hold my own son up right now as he begins to move tentatively across the ice. I'm on my skates and I hold him carefully, remembering my father's arms on me. These are the good stories, the shaping stories. I wonder as I write about the commitment to caretake, taking care of me in this way through the experience in an ice rink. A physical object between us, the ice rink, a relational place in a different way. We were learning to move in a different way in this place. I close my eyes now. I can still see that rink in my mind, taking me home always. Never read that in public before. Thank you very much. I'll click now, try to unpack this story a little bit. Yeah, I'm just put a little couple of slides up there and for help us think about that. And really what I was thinking about is that the embodiment, right? The stories that are in our bones, as caregivers, right? And the stories that are in the bones of children that we're working with. Not all the stories are bad stories, but it's easy to stay in the red. But we have to push forward through our walks in a park or through the experience in an ice rink along, not only physically, but metaphorically, to try to push for the stories filled with possibility in kids. And we can't just be stuck in the red. The red to me is the deficit notions, that are so easy to fall into. And that's why I wanted to read that piece, to start to think about like some of the stories that we just might not know, and it's through the movement, it's through the play, it's through having a cup of tea together, walking together, sitting together in different ways, but listening together always, that some of these stories begin to unfold in the most beautiful, sustaining ways. In that practice too, it's a practice that, I pay attention to in my own body. When I'm taking in the stories, the difficult stories, the sometimes hard stories, is that I'm trying to always find a way, through my walks, to process the stories and to take care of them in a good way, so they don't negatively affect me, so I can keep on walking, so I can keep on skating, so I can keep on thinking about the intergenerational knowledge and the beautiful stories that exist in people. I really, this one piece by Johnson that I really, want to read and think with more carefully. He encourages to think beyond metaphor, as defined by language, when he calls on us to think about it as making meaning in the everyday and mundane experiences that shape and influence our actions. Making meaning in the everyday and mundane experiences that shape and influence our actions. My friends and I are writing about the mundane experiences. We're writing about it quite a bit these days, because the thing that we're finding in work with caregivers, educators, teachers, and other thing that I'm finding in young people's stories, the sustaining stories are the 1,000 bits and tiny pieces, the mundane, ordinary experiences that sometimes we gloss over. It's not the performative, it's not the giant, it's not the one-offs. It's actually making meaning of the everyday, and in this practice, I try to write in my journal almost every single day, because sometimes the most meaningful experiences I walk right by and 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 didn't think with them, and how important that they are to sustain my practice, to sustain my energy, to sustain my heart work in this. I said the taking me home stories, that returning home is much more than a physical rank. It has multiple and layered meanings that continue to shape my experiences in the present. And just like that, I'm writing about an ice rink, maybe because it's seasons changing time, but I'm writing about the metaphoric ice rinks, in all our stories, and how important it is to go back to those with our timeline art, to think about the pieces that brought us to this work, and to think about the tiny steps along the way that sustain us in our work. That's why I'm thinking more deeply about these days. I'm going to quickly get a glass of water, and I'll just click on the next slide. I just wrote this piece about, flashing forward and thinking about how youth work has been like so foundational for me, in that, it really it's in all the things that I do, that it's never left me. I started off as a youth worker when I was 17 years old. I'm 50 years old now. And I thought, I actually thought wrongly, but I thought, like, what am I going to do when I get older, like I am right now? Because Peter Pan won't be able to fly anymore. And I guess I've learned through these pieces that I guess you become different in different ways, but you still don't lose your roots, and that's why I put trees. And growing what is good is, no matter what happens in my life. I guess I went to university now for close to 16 years. I did my master's. I was supposed to be, I wanted to be a child psychologist. I'll go back and finish my practicum, and I'll get that, because that's something I really want to do. I had a youth work diploma, a 2-year youth work diploma. That's been the best life-giving job ever. And I went on to become a teacher, and went on to become a professor, where I've been doing that for 15 years. But the most sustained work is always the work with young people. So no matter, they'll never let me down in terms of, you know, their honesty, in terms of, seeing the hopeful pieces in them, seeing the struggle. Of course, I've seen some horrible things, some bad things, but I don't get stuck in that. Try to remember the good things and try to look for the more hopeful things. I do these sessions in the present, and I try to get a sense of the place, especially when I'm working with kids in schools, in the institution, knowing that, my body's shaped by my experiences. My experiences were as a youth worker working on the street, in communities, on reserve, in fields, in old tennis courts, playing in the Prairie Cup where I'd spend time with broken hockey sticks till the sun would go down, with young people who are just trying to stay a little hopeful in a life. Those early experiences always shaped me. And they brought me to schools where I had to figure out ways to work with young people in the institution. And the institution doesn't always allow for the beautiful stories and the bubbles to animate a kid's life. It's sometimes there's a lot of mistrust in those places. Sometimes there's not a lot of patience in those places. Sometimes there's not a lot of love in those places. So as I became a teacher, I always would go back to my roots of a youth worker. And how those opportunities to listen in a different way, to listen sideways, to try to pay attention to that and look for those opportunities within the institution, to try to listen sideways and look for opportunities for youth, with youth, alongside youth, so we can let the bubbles really fly and we can walk 10 feet in a hallway, regardless of. So I have these sessions, I do in the present right now, and I'm making a huge assumption that what is good, we really write on big white poster paper what is good, assuming there's something good in school for them. That's a huge assumption. But what is good leads us to all kinds of beautiful sideways conversations. And most of the time, what is good is not the subject matter, it's the people like yourself. One careful, thoughtful adult that will listen to them differently. Growing what is good. Click. I just leave this slide on there and think about the intergenerational knowledge. It's the Iceman wasn't about playing hockey or being good at hockey or sport itself. It was more about the relational moment between people. And so those kind of messages still stay with me, and I carry them forward to the opportunity to try to listen carefully to kids in a different way, both in and outside of school in the present. And I think about that in a life, in my own timeline art is, how the seasons changing time, pull on us often. I call this the pedagogy at tea. I have a backpack that I always bring, and in my backpack, I learned really quickly that the cheapest thing I could do, the quickest thing I could do, the most impactful thing I could do is sit and have a cup of tea with a kid. Because it's not that hard to find a boiling, a teapot and something to make some water warm. And then through that, we can have a conversation together. What have I seen along the way? Last year, I was in 82 schools across North America, working with kids on the margins, not marginalized kids, two different things. I talk about, things that really matter when I see schools working in good ways, in beautiful ways with kids, like transform physical spaces, connecting spaces where we can have different types of conversations, where we can disrupt the cadence or the structures of the institution, the school, where we can have a silent conversation, where we can just sit alongside each other in a healthy, good way, where we could think together, where quite frankly, where we could pray together, where we could cleanse together, where we could smudge together, where we can kneel and sit together. I look for schools and see some of the places that are doing beautiful work. They often have navigators like yourself or coaches or graduation models, perhaps. But mostly it's youth working together, youth worker educators or social workers or those that can think sideways with kids to see something different, to see something unique when it's difficult to see in an institution. I see often the places that are filled with promise, communication that's celebrating youth and growth through teachings. Hey, I'm part of that right now with the organization that's doing this beautiful work and hosting this conversation. Communication, celebrating youth and growth through teachings. Educative spaces with high expectations. Places that understand that despite coming from something different and something that messes with the baseline, that just became because we came from a different neighborhood or a different story, it doesn't mean that we're not capable. It doesn't mean that we can't read. It doesn't mean that we don't want to participate. It doesn't mean that we don't have voice. It doesn't mean that we're not smart. Educated spaces with high expectations, not low expectations. We fly with the eagles in these places. Students physically reaching out for help, imagining otherwise, places where they can name key people in their school story, in their service provider story. All it takes is just one person listening in a different way. Opportunities for leadership and voice. True leadership and voice, not performative, not where we say we're going to do a leadership group and never listen to kids and never give them the agency. It's a place where adults don't talk. It's the step by step, bird by bird, stone by stone, twig by twig. Today, we're going to make our way to school today stories that I'm looking for. Yeah, I send 250 individual messages to kids across North America, encouraging them to step by step, bird by bird, stone by stone, twig by twig, flake by flake, leaf by leaf. Today, you're going to make your way to school today. The most simple message I send through a text message to try to stay a little bit more hopeful, to try to do your best to make it. I know it's a difficult actual physical journey sometimes to get there. The hardest part, though, is the spiritual, emotional. But I'm there alongside you, cheering you on, even if you only make it for a part of the day. Step by step, bird by bird, stone by stone. Today, we're going to make our way to school today. And I say, yeah, I still want more. And that's why I like hanging out with folks like you. I want to see more language in some of these places, like school, more culture, rooted in identity, more participation and high level experiences to imagine differently with kids. A radical advocacy approach that's sustainable, working alongside schools or other organizations, actually truly representing knowledge. Just because we're not a teacher doesn't mean that we can't add or contribute in more beautiful ways to actually something called school. But to truly listen to me in my youth worker experience, that maybe I could see some things that you can't quite see. And maybe you could see some things that you can't quite see. But we're here together because what we want to do in these wraparound, beautiful ways is we want to support a young person making a life. Because we're always on the making, we're always along the way. Our identity isn't fixed or frozen. It's just starting now. I put this, I kind of think, in the work that we do, the resonance is that we're navigators. I wrote a piece this year called Walking Through Oranges. It was about a situation, an experience that I had selling oranges on the side of the road. Selling the oranges on the side of the road in beautiful Victoria, British Columbia. The first time I'd ever visited Victoria after I graduated as a youth worker. And my dad was so disturbed that I was selling fruit on the side of the road. The first person in our family to get a college diploma, and I'm selling fruit on the side of the road. And I told my dad, but Dad, I'm selling so much fruit on the side of the road. The boss has taught me the difference between oranges, what they taste like, which ones are the best. You could tell through feel. You could tell by smelling them. And that oranges, I've been able to transfer this knowledge that I'm learning to oranges to people. And I get to hear all these people's stories in their life that are traveling all over. And here I am selling oranges, and I'm doing a great job doing it. And I wrote this piece, this little essay this year called Walking Through Oranges. And it's connected to this idea of a navigator. So in our work, we are navigators, that we have to help young people imagine otherwise. We have to help them walk through oranges. So it's really easy for us to say in schools or in other places or career centers or these things, well, yeah, you should go be a social worker, go be a teacher. You should go be this, but it's really difficult to walk through oranges if you've never tasted an orange, if you've never touched an orange, if you never experienced holding an orange in your hands. And so with many of the young people we're working with, they have never walked through oranges. And so our job as navigators is to quite literally walk alongside them through those forest places, through those concrete places, through those school places, through those employment places. So through all these places to help foster imagination, to build the bubbles a little bit, to help sustain the bubbles floating, taking flight, helping us walk 10 feet tall, helping us see something we might not be able to see within ourselves. And that's the beautiful navigational work that you're doing in all the different places that is so important, but it's also so important to slow down and to help with the transition, to help with drawing the lines, help with animating the pieces through experiences by walking alongside them. I wrote, what do we think it is, or what do we know it isn't, like in terms of like the work that we're doing. Your role, I don't even like using the word role because it's too concrete. Thinking about what a navigator might be doing. What's our purpose alongside youth? And then we go back to the Iceman. As he glides across the ice with the moon shining down. I'm not looking for an ice rink, and I definitely don't want kids to become hockey players all the time. I'm just looking for the physical place in between so we can metaphorically travel to each other's stories in a good way. Even sometimes the stories are difficult. It's not always bouquets and butterflies, but we got to create the portal to imagine otherwise. Next, click. I said the thing that helps remind is that it's so easy to talk about transition, but there's transition when we often talk about it. It's like an upwardly mobile transition to the next thing. But as we know in life, the transition, if we were to draw that out in our maps with kids, this whole idea of transition in life, our maps are wildly filled with artistic pieces, with all kinds of colors, with all kinds of lines that aren't necessarily smooth or straight. And so when we talk about transition, I really want to, make sure that we're breaking down that word and we're thinking about the 1,000 bits and pieces and the stories along the way, the mundane ones, not just the big moments like graduation. And then I just wrote some pieces, and there's a lot of pieces here that I've been thinking about in terms of data, and I don't even want to talk about them all, but you're going to have these slides. But I talked about how the micro could teach the macro, and the macro could teach the micro in terms of data. And that I'm always looking for patterns, but the only way to find patterns is to sit with kids and understand that we can look at attendance or data or marks or transition, but we have to look for the in-between markers too. And that there's all kinds of responsive data points in a youth life, and that we wouldn't want to be just looking at the big brush strokes. But the piece that I think with in terms of this that you mean is understanding baseline and the importance of quantitative measures, but also looking at like qualitative data and story as data. There's a great book that you've probably read, and I think about it in the same way. Some parts of it in terms of like street data, but you need to create the portal to have conversations, to understand the patterns of a life with kids. And always, that we're going to disrupt the deficit narratives. If I just looked at attendance in a singular glance, it would not be a hopeful story sometimes, but there's way more than attendance to actually measure or think with the life of a child. This is the piece, I wrote, thinking about Hannah Arendt's spaces of appearance and the importance of visibility and being seen, building responsive models in schools, the importance of understanding the complexity of geography and the geography that lives in the bones of children, schooling experiences, that there's different starting points and baseline data looks different, even in our own stories. That's the thing we sometimes forget is actually looking at our own timeline art. What does our school story look like? What does our timeline look like if we created that? And I always say, let's remember now the purple rain. And so I was in Ontario and I was working with these awesome young people in schools. And I worked with a group that was trying to start a Black Youth Student Association. And they really felt like in school they weren't being taken seriously or heard. And so we had tea together and we sat together and we mapped it out together and we dreamt together over the course of a lunch. And it was beautiful, the ideas. And they had real strong dreams about what they wanted to do and they wanted to write them down on paper. And I shared this piece that I wrote, and then they mocked up some graphics. I told them if they could create a graphic that represented that, I said I'd buy hoodies for them, and I want them to walk 10 feet tall and truly represent what leadership looks like as young people in this particular school. And so they sent me their logo, and we created these beautiful hoodies, and they sent me a picture. And next week I'm going to go see them again, and I can't wait to hear about what their adventures are looking. But that interaction, stayed with me. And on the plane ride home back to Edmonton from Toronto, I wrote on my phone in one quick flight home, I wrote a piece called Purple Rain. And I'm just going to read this quickly, a small part of it. And it's about finding the purple possibilities in people. It's about disrupting the deficit notions of the color red. Red X's, red marks, red blushes. Okay. However, how about the turn to purples we find in other places that catch our eye and fill our imagination with the possibility of otherwise and everything? Like the possibility in a little boy's eyes, a reflection. Is it a mirage? Sometimes it's just not about the color, it's about what we might be seeing or what we might want to see. A purple haze, a purple gaze. At least that's what I think. At least that's what I want to hold on to these days. So what about the other types of purple? Like the careful brush strokes of the desert sky, a Saturday night kind of link. How about sitting in the shadows of giants, the mountains, at the tips of the Three Sisters, watching over the valley, protecting, feeding the waterways physically and spiritually? I'm sure one could recognize the calling of purples in this place. The bounce of the sun rays touching the water, reflecting, offered a special purple glimpse during the lakeshore summers of a well-spent youth. That is for certain. I could see it in the leaves turning time. Purple times call for recognizing the springtime lilacs that return at this time now, painting dot to dot all the neatly manicured urban places. However, one must remember how they take off wildly and dance differently in the wilderness, which seems more fitting for their kind of stories, for their kind of wilderness. The purple stains on hands, fingerprints marked with love to the gathering rhythm of Saskatoon's calling, and purple berry seasonal ceremonies. I won't call them blueberries or blackberries at this time because I think there's a shade of purple in my memory. The haze of purple, purple swirling circles, purple in a cup of perfectly steeped tea, purple magical soothing flavors on a warm sweater day. That's worth mentioning. Purple sometimes comes to me through the crisps of snow and ice, when the perfectness of a walk on a frozen lake meets a forever stretching sky. That is quite a sight. That's my kind of purple. So what I'm trying to say in this essay that I wrote about the color purple and how times so often we walk by the color purple as unnoticed, and to look for the purple possibilities. And when I work with young people, in schools, often on the margins, not marginalized, that so often they're covered over with red deficit dots and markers that tell a singular story of their life, which we don't quite know. And so I ask schools and other places and organizations to also try to remember the purple possibilities. That means the stories, the purple stories, the celebrations, not the performative, the beautiful things that we only find by sitting with kids to understand more about their stories, more about their life making that are filled with purple. And I said, we don't go through kids and we don't talk about all the reds. We're going to always look for purple, the purple rain in their stories. I'm reminding myself when I go into schools, regardless of a difficult situation or not, to think with purple always, to hold on to that so I don't fall into the red. I'm not saying red's a bad color. It's one of my favorite, but so often we're quick to the reds on paper. I just said, what does it look like to you to find these places both in and outside of school? And that's such a perfect picture. We know the pictures aren't this perfect. What's it currently working for you in this place? You mean what I'm trying to get is that I need you to be healthy. We need you to be healthy to sustain your practice, to sustain your walks through the parks, to sustain your family stories, to be there for your family, to listen to their stories because they need you also. What are the pathways that make sense? How do we do this in a good way, in a healthy way? How do we map it so we could keep it going? So Peter Pan could keep on flying. So the stories don't slow you down so much that you can't move anymore. I could still see that rink in my mind taking me home always. Sometimes there's lost boys and lost girls in the work, and we want to be able to take them home always. And that might just be to the importance of sitting together and hearing the story. I know that for certain. And I don't know a lot of things for certain. And the work that I've done, I lost 21 young people to suicide. I recall the importance of sitting and listening. I still sit with those families to this day. A story listening is one worth paying attention to. Click. The Iceman. Click. And then I think about the geography and all our stories. And I do speeches, and sometimes kids, I think that they have bikes or things, and I think that I kind of understand. And just when I think that, I don't know. Turns out that many kids in my community didn't have bikes. So I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy a bike for every kid in this community. And we're going to be able to bike to a place in our imagination. We're going to be able to bike to our stories through the forest, to different stories, to different experiences, through good and bad. We will be able to bike to them because every kid should have a bike and a helmet. That's back home at the rapids. Or, if you're not biking, I said we should be able to swim to our stories, to float to our stories, to paddle to our stories. And then I stay here. This is good. Mitho Waskawaywin. You could go to the next one. The other way. That's beautiful. Right here. Perfect. Mitho Waskawaywin, every kid from pre-K to grade 12 and to adult back home knows this. Mitho Waskawaywin literally means to move well, moving well spiritually, physically, in relationship together. Now that's the kind of vision that I like. That's what I'm thinking about these days. And sometimes we just play. You don't need a lot of money to play and make a different type of connection with kids. Click. And sometimes we look for the opportunities to for kids to make their way through the forest like this young boy. Start with a story, end with a story. You see, my dad, he was the Iceman, my goalie. He did not know how to skate. We played on that sheet of ice nearly every night during the long lull of winter in this prairie place. I can still see when I close my eyes those big black boots with yellow tattered laces. This image I can recall looking down as he held me up going forward. I was only 4 when I first started moving around the ice, balance, careful step by step through the silence. Gray park, no toque, full fur, coldness weathered. These are the early memories of places in childhood that stay with me. It's seasons change in time now, with the first snowfall. Running down the lane after school to get to that skating rink. I recall, let's go, hurry up, it's getting dark. We gotta play, Dad. I'm thinking it must have been difficult some days for him to follow me, effort needed, slowly bundling up. I could tie up my own skates now. I'm getting stronger now. I don't need as much help now. I'll be all right now. Faster, smoother, gliding edges over time. I'm the only one out there most nights. My dad was tired. He can no longer stay out like he used to. I only began to understand this much later. These early memories stay with me in the present and are all called forth through the sprinkles of snow, ice forming, sliding forward through the sounds of children laughing on an outdoor rink of their own. I hold my own son up right now as he begins to move tentatively across the ice. I'm on my skates and I hold him carefully, remembering my father's arms on me on that ice rink. These are the good stories. These are the shaping stories. I wonder as I write about the commitment to caretake, taking care of me in this way through the experiences on an ice rink. A physical object between us, an ice rink, it's a relational place in a different way. We're learning to move in a different way in this place. I close my eyes now. I can still see that rink in my mind, taking me home always. Thank you for today.
Thank you so much, Sean.